Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. Eric woke abruptly, his breath catching in his throat as if he'd been drowning in a sea of darkness. The room around him was dimly lit by soft ambient lights embedded in sleek metallic walls. His heart pounded like a drumbeat echoing through empty corridors. "Eric," came a soft voice beside him, a voice like liquid starlight. He turned his head toward the sound and saw her, Mariah. Her skin shimmered faintly with an otherworldly blue hue under the cabin's light. Her golden eyes were filled with concern as she reached out to touch his cheek. "Another bad dream?" she asked gently. Eric nodded slowly, his mind still clouded by fragments of something he couldn't quite remember. "Yeah, but it's fading now." Mariah's lips curved into a playful smile as she leaned closer. "Well," she whispered teasingly, "I know just how to chase those nightmares away." Her lips brushed against his ear before capturing his mouth in a kiss that made him forget everything else, the dream, the unease lingering at the edges of his thoughts, even where he was. As they lay tangled together afterward, their bodies still warm from their shared passion, Eric found himself staring at her in awe. She was perfect, too perfect. "You're staring again," Mariah teased softly. "Can you blame me?" he replied with a grin. "I still can't believe someone like you would want someone like me." Mariah laughed, a sound like wind chimes swaying in an alien breeze, and nestled closer against him. "You're too hard on yourself," she murmured. "You're special, more than you know." Her words sent a shiver down his spine, not from pleasure this time but from something else entirely. A flicker of doubt passed through his mind like static on an old screen. "Mariah," he began hesitantly after a long pause. "Do you ever feel like something's missing?" She stiffened slightly in his arms but quickly masked it with another radiant smile. "What could possibly be missing when I have you?" she replied lightly. But later that night, as she slept peacefully beside him, Eric found himself unable to shake the feeling gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. Something wasn't right, not with her, not with this ship. The next morning brought no clarity, only more questions. As they walked hand in hand through the ship's pristine corridors on their way to breakfast, Eric couldn't help but notice how eerily empty everything felt. "Where is everyone?" he asked aloud without meaning to. Mariah glanced at him sharply before forcing another one of those dazzling smiles that seemed designed to disarm him completely. "It's a luxury cruise," she said dismissively. "Privacy is part of the package." Eric nodded slowly but couldn't shake the sense that there was more to it than that. Later that day, as they stood together by one of the ship's massive viewports gazing out at an endless expanse of stars, Mariah suddenly turned toward him with tears glistening in her golden eyes. "Eric," she said softly but urgently. "If you could go anywhere, anywhere at all, where would it be?" He frowned at her sudden intensity but answered honestly after a moment's thought. "I don't know. I think I'd stay right here, with you." Her smile was radiant yet tinged with sadness as she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "You're too good for this world," she whispered cryptically before kissing him deeply. As their lips met once more under the cold light of distant stars beyond the viewport glass, Eric felt himself falling deeper under her spell, even as part of him screamed silently for answers he couldn't yet articulate. And somewhere deep within his mind, buried beneath layers upon layers of forgotten memories, a single word echoed faintly like a distant signal struggling through static. Days turned into weeks aboard the starship, each one blurring into the next with the same routine of passionate encounters, lavish meals, and exploration of the ship's seemingly endless corridors. Yet, despite the intoxicating nature of his relationship with Mariah, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was living in a gilded cage, a beautiful prison crafted to keep him docile and unaware. One morning, Eric awoke to find Mariah gone from their bed. A sense of unease washed over him as he rose and began searching the cabin. He found her standing by the viewport, gazing out at the star-strewn void with a look of profound sadness etched on her face. "Mariah?" he asked gently, approaching her cautiously. Is everything all right? She turned, startled, and quickly composed herself, offering him a practiced smile. Of course, darling, she said, her voice a little too bright. Just admiring the view. It's quite breathtaking, isn't it? Eric stepped closer, placing a hand on her arm. You seem distant, he said softly. Is there something you're not telling me? Mariah hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and longing. There are things about me you wouldn't understand, she whispered, as if confessing a terrible secret. Before Eric could press her further, a sudden tremor shook the ship, throwing them both off balance. Alarms blared through the corridors, a harsh, discordant sound that shattered the serene atmosphere. What was that? Eric demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. Mariah's face paled, her eyes widening with alarm. I don't know, she stammered, clutching his arm tightly. Stay here. I'll go find out what's happening. But as Mariah turned to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows of the corridor, a tall, wiry man with piercing blue eyes and a grim expression. He wore a simple, utilitarian uniform that seemed out of place amidst the ship's opulence. Eric, the man said, his voice rough but urgent. We need to talk. Mariah froze, her hand hovering over the door controls. Who are you? She demanded, her voice laced with suspicion. What do you want? The man ignored her, his gaze fixed intently on Eric. My name is Kieran, he said. I know you. Or, rather, I knew you. Before. He trailed off, as if unsure how to proceed. Eric stared at Kieran in confusion. I'm sorry, he said, shaking his head. I don't think I've ever met you before. Kieran stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied Eric's face. Don't you remember? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The resistance? The battle for Kepler 186f. Does any of that sound familiar? Eric frowned, his mind struggling to grasp the meaning of Kieran's words. Kepler 186f. The resistance? They sounded like fragments of a forgotten dream, vague and indistinct. I don't know what you're talking about, Eric said, his head throbbing with a dull ache. I think you have me confused with someone else. Kieran sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I was afraid of this, he muttered. They've wiped your memory clean. Wiped my memory? Eric repeated, incredulous. Who? They, Kieran said grimly, gesturing towards Mariah. The Zidonians. Mariah gasped, her face turning ashen. Don't listen to him, Eric, she cried. He's lying. He's trying to turn you against me. Kieran ignored her protests, his eyes still locked on Eric. The Zidonians are a parasitic species, he explained. They feed off the emotions of other beings, manipulating them into compliance. They use advanced technology to rewrite memories and create false realities. You were one of their most formidable opponents, Eric. That's why they took you. That's why they're keeping you here. Eric stared at Kieran, his mind reeling from the implications of his words. Could it be true? Was Mariah really a Zidonian, a manipulator hiding behind a mask of beauty and affection? He turned to Mariah, searching her face for any sign of deception. But her expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed facade that revealed nothing. Eric, please, Mariah pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. Don't believe him. He's trying to destroy everything we have. Torn between his growing love for Mariah and Kieran's dire warnings, Eric felt his head spinning with confusion. Who was telling the truth? Who could he trust? I don't know what to believe, Eric confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. I need proof. Kieran nodded grimly. I can show you proof, he said. But it won't be easy. The Zidonians are watching us. We have to be careful. He turned to Mariah, his eyes filled with contempt. I know you care about Eric, he said. But you have to let him go. He doesn't belong here. He belongs with us, with the resistance. Mariah's eyes flashed with anger, her hands clenching into fists. You can't take him away from me, she cried. He's mine. He's not yours, Kieran retorted. He's his own person. And he deserves to know the truth. Before Mariah could respond, Kieran reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a sleek, metallic object that hummed with energy. He pointed it at Eric's head, and a beam of light shot out, engulfing his mind. Eric cried out in pain, his body convulsing as a flood of memories surged through his brain. He saw images of himself fighting alongside Kieran and other rebels against the Zidonian forces. He saw Mariah, not as a lover but as an enemy, a powerful Zidonian operative tasked with subduing him. The memories were overwhelming, shattering the carefully constructed reality that Mariah had created. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. It's true, he gasped, his voice trembling with emotion. It's all true. Mariah stared at him, her face a mask of despair. Eric, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can explain. Explain what? Eric demanded, his voice filled with anger and betrayal. Explain how you lied to me. Explain how you manipulated me. Explain how you turned me into your puppet. Mariah remained silent, unable to meet his gaze. I thought you loved me, Eric said, his voice cracking with emotion. I thought we had something special. I do love you, Mariah insisted, her voice filled with sincerity. But, it's complicated. There are things you don't understand. I understand that you're a Zidonian, Eric said, his voice cold and hard. And I understand that everything you've told me has been a lie. He turned to Kieran, his eyes filled with determination. I'm ready, he said. Take me back to the resistance. I'm ready to fight. Kieran nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. It's good to have you back, Eric, he said. But it won't be easy. The Zidonians will do everything they can to stop us. As they turned to leave, Mariah stepped in front of them, blocking their path. You can't go, she said, her voice filled with desperation. I won't let you. Eric stared at her, his heart aching with a mixture of love and betrayal. I'm sorry, Mariah, he said softly. But I have to do this. I have to fight for what's right. With that, he pushed past her and followed Kieran out of the cabin, leaving Mariah alone in the opulent prison, her tears falling silently onto the polished floor. He glanced back once before stepping into the corridor, her expression one of anguish, and her golden eyes still held a flicker of something that looked a lot like love. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Eric felt a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. He was no longer a pawn in the Zidonians' game. He was a soldier, a rebel, a fighter for freedom. And he was ready to reclaim his past and fight for a future worth living. The journey back to the resistance base was fraught with danger. Kieran explained that the Zidonians had spies everywhere, and even the ship they were on might be compromised. He kept them moving, using hidden routes and secret passages to avoid detection. Eric found himself relying on instincts he didn't know he had, a soldier's awareness of his surroundings, a rebel's distrust of authority. As they traveled, Eric peppered Kieran with questions about his past, the life that had been stolen from him. Kieran told him about their shared comrades, the battles they had fought, and the sacrifices they had made. He described Eric as a brilliant strategist and a fearless leader, a man who had inspired hope in the darkest of times. It's strange, Eric said, shaking his head in disbelief. I can see the memories, but they feel distant. Like I'm watching someone else's life. That's the Zidonian technology at work, Kieran explained. They can suppress memories, alter perceptions, even rewrite entire identities. It takes time to break through their programming. Despite his lingering doubts, Eric found himself drawn to Kieran's conviction and the shared experiences they had supposedly had. He wanted to believe that he was the hero Kieran described, that he could make a difference in the fight against the Zidonians. Meanwhile, Eric couldn't shake his thoughts about Mariah. Despite learning the truth about her Zidonian nature, he still felt a connection to her, a lingering affection that tugged at his heartstrings. He wondered if she had ever genuinely cared for him or if it had all been a carefully crafted performance. "What about Mariah?" Eric asked Kieran one evening as they rested in a hidden alcove. "Do you think she was telling the truth? About loving me?" Kieran sighed, his expression softening slightly. "I don't know, Eric," he admitted. "The Zidonians are masters of manipulation. They can fake emotions, create false connections. But sometimes, those connections become real. Mariah has been living among humans for a long time. It's possible that she developed genuine feelings for you. But she's still a Zidonian," Eric pointed out, his voice filled with doubt. "She's still part of the enemy." "That's true," Kieran conceded. "But maybe she can be turned. Maybe she can help us." Eric pondered Kieran's words, his mind wrestling with the possibility that Mariah could be an ally. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it was a dangerous gamble, one that could cost them everything. As they approached the resistance base, Kieran warned Eric to be cautious. "Not everyone will trust you," he said. "The Zidonians have infiltrated our ranks before. You'll have to prove your loyalty." The resistance base was hidden deep within a network of underground tunnels, a sprawling complex of makeshift living quarters, training facilities, and communication centers. As they entered, Eric was greeted with a mixture of suspicion and cautious optimism. One figure, a stern woman with short, cropped hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward to address them. "Kieran," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "What's the meaning of this? Who is this man?" "This is Eric," Kieran replied, his voice firm. "He's one of us. The Zidonians wiped his memory, but I've restored it." The woman eyed Eric skeptically. "He looks like a Zidonian plant to me," she said, her gaze unwavering. "How can we be sure he's telling the truth?" "He knows things only a member of the resistance would know," Kieran insisted. "I vouch for him." The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "But he'll be under strict surveillance. One wrong move, and he's out." As Eric settled into his new life at the resistance base, he found himself struggling to adapt. The memories of his past life flooded his mind, conflicting with the experiences he had had with Mariah. He felt like two different people, the hero and the lover, the soldier and the captive. One day, the woman approached Eric with a proposition. "We have a mission," she said. "A dangerous one. We need someone who can infiltrate a Zidonian facility and retrieve vital information. Kieran says you're the man for the job." Eric hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew it was a test, a chance to prove his loyalty to the resistance. But it also meant facing the Zidonians, confronting the people who had stolen his life. "I'll do it," Eric said, his voice filled with determination. "But I have one condition. I want to try and contact Mariah." The woman frowned, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why?" "She's a Zidonian. She's the enemy." "I know," Eric said. "But I think she might be able to help us. I think she might be willing to betray her own people." The woman scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're a fool if you think you can trust her," she said. "But all right. If you can convince her to help us, then fine. But don't expect me to hold my breath." With the woman's grudging approval, Eric set out on his mission, accompanied by Kieran and a small team of resistance fighters. As they approached the Zidonian facility, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. He managed to contact Mariah through a secure channel. When Mariah heard his voice, she was clearly stunned. "Eric," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Is that really you?" "It's me, Mariah," Eric said softly. I know everything. About the Zidonians, about the resistance, about what you did to me. Mariah was silent for a moment, then she spoke, her voice filled with regret. I'm so sorry, Eric, she said. I never meant to hurt you. Did you ever care about me? Eric asked, his voice laced with pain. Or was it all just a lie? Mariah hesitated, then she said, it started as a lie. But, it became real. I do care about you, Eric. More than you know. Then help me, Eric pleaded. Help me stop the Zidonians. Help me save the galaxy. Mariah was silent for a long moment, then she said, I can't. I'm bound by duty. I can't betray my own people. But what about me? Eric asked, his voice filled with desperation. What about us? Mariah sighed, her voice heavy with sorrow. I don't know what to do, she confessed. I'm torn between two worlds. I don't know where I belong. Then choose, Eric urged. Choose me. Choose the resistance. Choose what's right. Mariah hesitated for a moment, then she said, all right. I'll help you. But you have to promise me something. You have to promise me that you won't kill me. I promise, Eric said, his heart pounding in his chest. I won't let anything happen to you. With Mariah's help, Eric and his team infiltrated the Zidonian facility, managing to gather vital information about the Zidonians' plans. But as they prepared to escape, they were ambushed by Zidonian soldiers. A fierce firefight erupted, with lasers blazing and explosions rocking the facility. Eric fought alongside Kieran, his instincts honed by his forgotten past. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, Mariah appeared, leading a group of Zidonian rebels who had turned against their own people. Together, they fought off the Zidonian soldiers, clearing a path for Eric and his team to escape. As they fled the facility, Eric turned to Mariah, his eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. You did it, he said. You betrayed your own people to save us. Mariah smiled sadly. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it for myself. I did it because I finally realized that the Zidonians are wrong. They're destroying everything good in the galaxy. What will you do now? Eric asked. Mariah shrugged. I don't know, she said. I'm a traitor now. I have nowhere to go. You can come with us, Eric offered. You can join the resistance. Mariah hesitated for a moment, then she nodded slowly. All right, she said. I'll join you. But I don't expect to be welcomed with open arms. As they made their way back to the resistance base, Eric couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could win this war. Maybe, with Mariah's help, they could bring down the Zidonians and restore peace to the galaxy. But he also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The Zidonians would not give up easily. And even with Mariah on their side, the resistance would face many challenges. But for now, Eric allowed himself to savor the moment, the feeling of victory, the camaraderie of his fellow rebels, and the warmth of Mariah's hand in his. He had a new life, a new purpose, and a new love. And he was determined to make the most of it. Life at the resistance base settled into a routine of training, planning, and tense camaraderie. Mariah, despite her Zidonian heritage, worked tirelessly to prove her loyalty, using her knowledge of Zidonian tactics and technology to aid the resistance. However, she remained an outsider, treated with suspicion by many and outright hostility by a few. Eric found himself constantly defending her, vouching for her sincerity, and trying to bridge the gap between her and the other rebels. It wasn't easy. The memories of the Zidonian manipulations were still fresh in their minds, and the scars of their past traumas ran deep. One evening, as Eric and Mariah were sharing a meager meal of nutrient paste in the mess hall, a gruff-looking rebel approached them, his eyes filled with disdain. So, he sneered, addressing Mariah directly. The traitor finally decides to show her face. I still can't believe we're trusting a Zidonian. You probably have a transmitter implanted in your brain, feeding information back to your masters. Eric stood up, his fists clenching. That's enough, he said, his voice dangerously low. Mariah is on our side. She's risking her life to help us. Is she? The rebel retorted, his gaze unwavering. Or is she just playing us? Waiting for the right moment to stab us in the back. Mariah placed a hand on Eric's arm, urging him to calm down. It's all right, Eric, she said softly. He has a right to be suspicious. I understand. She turned to face the rebel, her expression calm and resolute. I know I can't undo the past, she said. I know I can't erase the pain and suffering the Zidonians have caused. But I can try to make amends. I can use my knowledge and abilities to fight against them. And I can prove that I'm not the enemy you think I am. The rebel remained silent for a moment, his eyes searching Mariah's face for any sign of deception. Finally, he grunted and turned away, muttering under his breath. As Eric and Mariah resumed their meal, Eric couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and frustration. I'm sorry, he said, his voice filled with resentment. You shouldn't have to put up with this. You've done so much for us. Mariah smiled sadly. It's all right, Eric, she repeated. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn their trust. Later that night, as they lay in their cramped quarters, Eric couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with thoughts and worries. What's wrong? Mariah asked, her voice soft and gentle. You seem restless. I'm just worried, Eric confessed. About everything. About the war, about the resistance, about you. Mariah reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and comforting. Don't worry about me, she said. I'm stronger than you think. And I'm not going anywhere. But what if the Zidonians find out about you? Eric asked, his voice filled with fear. What if they come after you? Mariah sighed, her expression clouding with sadness. I don't know, she admitted. But I can't live in fear. I have to do what I believe is right. And right now, that means fighting alongside you. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared through the resistance base, jolting them both out of their reverie. Red lights flashed, and the sound of shouting echoed through the corridors. What's happening? Eric demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. I don't know, Mariah said, her eyes wide with alarm. But it doesn't sound good. They scrambled out of bed and rushed to the command center, where they found the woman, her face grim and determined, addressing the assembled rebels. We have a situation, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. The Zidonians have launched a massive attack on our base. They're using a new type of weapon, a sonic disruptor that's jamming our communications and disabling our defenses. A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. We have to evacuate, the woman continued. But we can't leave without protecting the data. Eric, Kieran, I need you to lead a team to the data storage facility and secure the files. Mariah, you're with them. Your knowledge of Zidonian technology will be invaluable. Eric nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. He gathered his team, including Kieran and Mariah, and set out for the data storage facility. As they made their way through the chaotic corridors, they encountered heavy resistance from Zidonian soldiers. Laser fire streaked through the air, and explosions rocked the base. Mariah proved to be an invaluable asset, using her knowledge of Zidonian tactics to anticipate their moves and her understanding of their technology to disable their weapons. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her slender frame, taking down soldiers with a series of lightning-fast strikes. Despite her effectiveness, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Mariah seemed different. More focused, more ruthless. He couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that she was hiding something. Finally, they reached the data storage facility, a heavily fortified room deep within the base. As they began to download the files, Mariah suddenly turned to Eric, her eyes filled with a strange intensity. "Eric," she said, her voice low and urgent. "There's something you need to know. Something I've been hiding from you." Eric stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mariah hesitated for a moment, then she took a deep breath and said, "I'm not just a Zidonian. I'm also a hybrid. A genetically engineered combination of Zidonian and human DNA. I was created by the Zidonians to infiltrate the resistance and gather intelligence." Eric recoiled in shock, his mind reeling from the implications of her words. "What?" he gasped. "But, you said you betrayed the Zidonians. You said you were on our side." "I am," Mariah insisted, her voice filled with desperation. "But it's not that simple. The Zidonians, they have a hold on me. A connection that I can't break. They can control my thoughts, my emotions, even my actions. I thought I was free of them, but I was wrong. They're using me, Eric. They're using me to destroy the resistance." Eric stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her betrayal. He felt a surge of anger, of hurt, of disbelief. How could she have lied to him? How could he have been so blind? "I don't believe you," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You're lying. You're still working for the Zidonians." "No." Mariah cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, Eric, you have to believe me. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I can't control myself. The Zidonians, they're inside my head. They're forcing me to do this." As she spoke, Mariah's eyes began to glow with an eerie red light. Her body convulsed, and her voice changed, becoming deeper and more menacing. "Hello, Eric," the voice said. "It's been a long time. We've been watching you, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, the moment has come." Eric stared at Mariah, his heart filled with horror. He realized that she wasn't lying. She was truly a prisoner of her own body, a puppet controlled by the Zidonians. But he also knew that he couldn't let her destroy the resistance. He had to stop her, even if it meant hurting her. He raised his weapon, his hand trembling. "I'm sorry, Mariah," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "But I have to do this." And with that, he pulled the trigger. The laser beam shot out, striking Mariah in the chest. She gasped, her eyes widening with shock and pain. As she collapsed to the ground, the red light faded from her eyes, and her voice returned to normal. "Thank you, Eric," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You set me free." And with that, she died. Eric stood there, his weapon still smoking, his heart shattered into a million pieces. He had killed the woman he loved, the woman he thought he could trust. And in doing so, he had unleashed a new wave of grief and despair upon himself and the resistance. The veil was unraveling, revealing a truth far more painful than he could have ever imagined. The death of Mariah weighed heavily on Eric. He wrestled with guilt, sorrow, and a burning desire for revenge. He had killed the woman he loved, but he had also saved the resistance. It was a sacrifice he knew he had to make, but it didn't make it any easier. The resistance, though battered and bruised from the Zidonian attack, managed to evacuate the base and regroup at a new location. The information they had retrieved from the data storage facility proved invaluable, revealing the Zidonians' ultimate plan, to unleash a powerful psychic weapon that would enslave the minds of all sentient beings in the galaxy. The resistance knew they had to act fast. They formulated a plan to infiltrate the Zidonian headquarters and disable the psychic weapon before it could be deployed. It was a suicide mission, but they were willing to risk everything to save the galaxy. Eric, fueled by grief and a thirst for vengeance, volunteered to lead the mission. He was joined by Kieran and a small team of elite resistance fighters, all of whom were determined to strike a blow against the Zidonians. As they prepared for the mission, Eric found himself haunted by memories of Mariah. He remembered her laughter, her touch, her passion. He wondered if she had ever truly loved him or if it had all been a lie. Kieran, sensing Eric's turmoil, approached him with words of comfort. "I know this is hard, Eric," he said. "But you can't let Mariah's death break you. You have to stay focused. The fate of the galaxy depends on it." Eric nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. "I won't let her death be in vain," he said. "I'll make the Zidonians pay for what they did." The journey to the Zidonian headquarters was perilous. They had to navigate treacherous asteroid fields, evade Zidonian patrols, and infiltrate heavily guarded installations. But Eric and his team persevered, their resolve strengthened by their shared purpose. Finally, they reached the Zidonian headquarters, a massive space station orbiting a black hole. They infiltrated the station using a stolen Zidonian shuttle, disguising themselves as Zidonian officers. As they made their way through the station, they encountered heavy resistance from Zidonian soldiers. Fierce firefights erupted, with lasers blazing and explosions rocking the station. Eric fought with a ferocity born of grief and rage, his every blow fueled by the memory of Mariah. He moved like a whirlwind, taking down Zidonian soldiers with a series of lightning-fast strikes. Kieran, fighting alongside Eric, was amazed by his skill and determination. He knew that Eric was not just fighting for the resistance, he was fighting for Mariah, for her memory, for her redemption. Finally, they reached the central chamber where the psychic weapon was housed. It was a massive device, humming with energy, surrounded by a force field. As they prepared to disable the weapon, they were confronted by the Zidonian leader, a towering figure with glowing red eyes and a cruel, twisted smile. "So," the Zidonian leader said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The resistance has finally come to face its doom. You cannot stop us. The psychic weapon is ready to be deployed. Soon, the entire galaxy will be under our control." Eric stepped forward, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We won't let you," he said. "We'll destroy that weapon, even if it means sacrificing ourselves." The Zidonian leader laughed. "You are fools," he said. "You cannot defeat me. I am all-powerful." With that, the Zidonian leader unleashed a psychic blast, sending Eric and his team flying backward. They crashed to the ground, dazed and disoriented. As the Zidonian leader prepared to deliver the final blow, Kieran stepped in front of Eric, shielding him from the psychic attack. "Run, Eric!" Kieran shouted. "Save the galaxy. Avenge Mariah." With that, Kieran unleashed a powerful energy blast, sacrificing himself to destroy the Zidonian leader. The Zidonian leader screamed in agony, his body disintegrating into dust. Eric, filled with grief and gratitude, rose to his feet. He knew he had to finish what Kieran had started. He ran towards the psychic weapon, dodging laser fire from the remaining Zidonian soldiers. Reaching the weapon, Eric struggled to disable the force field. He knew that if he failed, the entire galaxy would be doomed. Just as he was about to give up, he remembered Mariah. He remembered her knowledge of Zidonian technology. He closed his eyes, focusing his mind, trying to recall everything she had taught him. Suddenly, he remembered a sequence of codes that Mariah had shown him, codes that could disable the force field. He quickly entered the codes into the weapon's control panel. The force field flickered and died. Eric quickly planted explosives on the weapon and set the timer. As he ran from the chamber, the explosives detonated, destroying the psychic weapon in a blinding flash of light. The Zidonian headquarters began to crumble, collapsing into the black hole. Eric managed to escape in a stolen shuttle, watching as the Zidonian headquarters was destroyed. He had avenged Mariah, he had avenged Kieran, and he had saved the galaxy. As he soared through space, Eric couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. He had won the war, but he had lost so much. He had lost Mariah, he had lost Kieran, and he had lost a part of himself. He looked up at the stars, his eyes filled with tears. "I did it, Mariah," he whispered. "I saved the galaxy. But I'll never forget you. I'll always love you." And as he gazed at the distant stars, Eric knew that Mariah was watching over him, smiling down on him with pride and love. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. Her memory would live on, inspiring hope and courage in the hearts of all who fought for freedom. The fractured veil was now mended, the galaxy was safe, but Eric's heart would forever bear the scars of love and loss. He continued the fight, a solitary beacon of hope in a galaxy slowly rebuilding, forever haunted and forever driven by the memory of the Zidonian beauty who had shown him both the deepest love and the cruelest betrayal. His journey was far from over, but he knew, with a certainty that resonated in his very soul, that he would carry her with him always, a star guiding him through the darkness.